You've probably noticed it. Some days your foundation looks flawless, and other days it's sliding off your face by noon or clinging to every dry patch you didn't even know you had. What changed? The truth is, it might not be your skin at all. It might be the fundamental chemistry of what you're putting on it. I'm Dr. Elena Voss, and I've spent years analyzing cosmetic formulations to figure out what actually works and what's just expensive marketing. You're listening to Luxury Beauty on a Budget podcast. Quick note before we start. Everything you're about to hear is researched, written, and fact-checked by real human experts. That's me, Dr. Elena Voss. But the voice delivering it is AI-generated, so we can get this information to you faster and more consistently. To everyone who's been listening for a while, thank you. It means a lot. And if this is your first episode, welcome. I think you'll find this useful. We release new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and each one digs into the actual science behind beauty products, so you're not just guessing or trusting marketing claims. Today, we're comparing skin-responsive tints and traditional foundations to figure out which one actually works better for different skin types. The verdict up front: skin-responsive tints offer better barrier compatibility and reduced comedogenic load for most skin types, but traditional foundations still dominate in coverage density and longevity. Your choice really depends on whether you prioritize skin health or optical correction. The skin-responsive tint versus foundation debate centers on a fundamental shift in cosmetic chemistry, pH reactive pigment technology versus conventional coverage mechanisms. We're going to examine formulation density, ingredient penetration profiles, barrier interaction, oxidative stability, and real-world performance metrics across different skin conditions. Let me give you the quick comparison before we dive deep. Skin-responsive tints typically contain 15 to 30% active coverage from adaptive pigments, while traditional foundations pack in 40 to 70% fixed pigments plus fillers. Tints cause minimal barrier disruption because they're formulated at a pH of 5.5 to 6.0, which is close to your skin's natural pH. Traditional foundations usually sit at pH 6.5 to 8.0, which is moderate to high disruption territory. The comedogenic load, basically how likely something is to clog your pores, runs low for tints at about 0.5% to 2% silicones versus moderate to high for foundations at 5 to 15% silicones and waxes. Oxidative stability, or how long the color stays true, runs 4 to 6 hours for tints as the iron oxides shift, compared to 8 to 12 hours for foundations with stabilized pigments. Price per ounce for tints runs around $40 to $120 from budget to prestige, while foundations have a wider range from $12 to $180 per ounce. And for skin type suitability, tints work best for oily, combination, and reactive skin, while traditional foundations can work for all types, depending on the specific formulation. Now, let's talk about formulation chemistry and ingredient density. Skin-responsive tints operate on encapsulated iron oxide technology that reacts to your skin's natural pH, releasing pigment gradually. The typical formulation includes 2 to 5% encapsulated colorants, 3 to 8% hydrating humectants like sodium hyaluronate at 50 to 200 kilodalton molecular weight, and 10 to 15% emollients. Traditional foundations use suspended pigment systems, titanium dioxide and iron oxides, at 8 to 20% concentration, bound in silicone matrices like dimethane or cyclopentasiloxane at 5 to 15%. This creates higher optical density, but it also increases the occlusive barrier on your skin surface. Here's the molecular reality. Particle size matters. Skin-responsive tints typically use 20 to 50 nanometer encapsulated pigments that adapt on contact. Traditional foundations use 100 to 300 nanometer particles for immediate uniform coverage. Smaller particles mean less mechanical barrier disruption, but potentially deeper follicular penetration if your skin barrier is already damaged. Budget formulations deliver comparable iron oxide encapsulation to prestige options. Check the link below to see the current price. Both are manufactured with standard cosmetic grade encapsulation technology. You're paying for brand positioning, not materially different chemistry. The texture differential is substantial. Skin-responsive tints feel like lightweight serums with a viscosity typically around 1,000 to 3,000 centipoise versus traditional foundations at 5,000 to 12,000 centipoise. That viscosity difference translates directly to sebum interaction. Lower viscosity formulas mix with your natural oils rather than sitting on top of them, reducing the greasy midday sheen that plagues heavy foundations on oily skin types. For anyone exploring bioregenerative skincare layered under base products, the lower occlusive load of tints preserves active ingredient penetration better than dense foundations. Moving on to coverage mechanism and opacity control. This is where the debate gets technical. Traditional foundations achieve coverage through mechanical opacity. You're essentially painting over discoloration with suspended pigments that physically block light reflection from the skin beneath. Skin-responsive tints work via adaptive chromophore activation. The encapsulated pigments release gradually based on your skin's surface pH, which typically runs 4.5 to 6.0, creating color that theoretically matches your undertone. In practice, this means 20 to 40% sheer coverage that builds incrementally rather than opaque coverage from first application. Here's the clinical verdict. For hyperpigmentation exceeding 3 to 4 shades variance from your base tone, skin-responsive tints won't provide sufficient correction. The iron oxide release mechanism simply can't generate enough chromatic density. Traditional foundations with 15 to 20% titanium dioxide content remain superior for covering melasma, post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, or vascular conditions like rosacea. However, the adaptive mechanism excels at evening subtle texture and tone variation without the dreaded mask effect. The pigment activates selectively where pH variance indicates inflammation or oil production, essentially self-correcting in real time. Let's do a price per performance analysis. Check the link below to see the current price for both budget and prestige options. They deliver the same pH-reactive iron oxide technology. The prestige version adds bisabol and glycyrrhetinic acid, both anti-inflammatory compounds at roughly 0.5% to 1% concentration. Nice additions, but not worth the 315% price premium unless you have severely compromised barrier function. The finish difference matters for photography. Traditional matte foundations with silica microspheres at 5 to 10% concentration scatter light more effectively, reducing the appearance of pores in high-resolution images. Skin-responsive tints maintain a dewy, luminous finish that can emphasize texture in harsh lighting. If you're constantly photographed, this becomes a legitimate consideration. Let's get into barrier interaction and transepidermal water loss. Here's where the formulation science intersects with actual skin health. Transepidermal water loss, or TEWL, increases proportionally to the occlusive load you place on skin. Traditional foundations with high silicone content create a semi-permeable barrier that can elevate TEWL by 15 to 30% over 8 hours. Skin-responsive tints typically contain 0.5% to 2% volatile silicones versus 5 to 15% in traditional foundations. Lower occlusion means your skin can regulate moisture and temperature more effectively. For anyone dealing with perioral dermatitis, seborrheic dermatitis, or compromised barrier function, this becomes critical. The comedogenic calculation. Traditional foundations often include isopropyl palmitate,
isopropyl myristate, or coconut oil derivatives, all scoring 3 to 5 on the comedogenic scale. Skin-responsive tints lean on squalane, caprylic capric triglyceride, or lightweight esters, typically 1 to 2 comedogenic rating. If you're acne-prone, this formulation difference translates to measurably fewer clogged pores over repeated use. pH is the overlooked factor. Most traditional foundations sit at pH 6.5 to 8.0 to stabilize pigment suspension and extend shelf life. Your skin's optimal pH is 4.7 to 5.75. That mismatch disrupts your acid mantle, the first line of defense against bacterial colonization and inflammation. Skin-responsive tints formulated at pH 5.5 to 6.0 maintain barrier integrity more effectively. Budget option worth noting. Check the link below to see the current price for a pH-balanced, low silicone formulation comparable to premium tints, though it lacks true adaptive pigment technology. For barrier-compromised skin on a budget, it splits the difference effectively. The oxidative stability issue. Skin-responsive tints begin color shifting after 4 to 6 hours as sebum and sweat alter surface pH. Traditional foundations maintain color fidelity for 8 to 12 hours due to stabilized pigment systems. If you need consistent coverage through a 12-hour workday without touch-ups, that stability becomes non-negotiable. Now, texture, application method, and wear pattern. The application experience differs substantially. Skin-responsive tints behave like hybrid serum cosmetics. You can apply with fingers, and the heat and friction activate pigment release. Traditional foundations require more deliberate blending with a brush, sponge, or specific buffing techniques to avoid streaking from the higher pigment load. Wear pattern analysis. Skin-responsive tints fade evenly, gradually returning to your natural skin tone as pigment oxidizes. Traditional foundations tend to separate in oily zones like the T-zone and around the nose and cling to dry patches, creating a mottled appearance by midday. For oily or combination skin, the even fade pattern of tints is subjectively more attractive than foundation breakdown. The reapplication logistics matter. You can layer skin-responsive tint over itself without buildup. The low pigment density prevents the cake face phenomenon. Traditional foundations layer poorly. Reapplication often requires blotting and powder setting, adding more occlusive material to already stressed skin. Removal ease is rarely discussed, but biochemically relevant. Skin-responsive tints break down with simple cleansing using pH-balanced gel or micellar water. Traditional foundations require oil-based or dual-phase removers to dissolve silicone matrices, introducing an additional step that can strip natural lipids if your cleanser is poorly formulated. For anyone following a barrier-first beauty approach, the cumulative effect of gentler removal requirements reduces mechanical stress on the stratum corneum over time. Texture on skin. Tints feel weightless. Most users can't perceive them after 15 minutes. Traditional foundations maintain a subtle presence on the skin, not necessarily uncomfortable, but detectable. This becomes relevant if you have sensory sensitivities or simply prefer forgetting you're wearing base makeup. Moving to performance across environmental conditions, humidity response varies dramatically. Skin-responsive tints become more active in humid environments because increased surface moisture alters pH, which can lead to uneven color development if you move between air-conditioned and humid spaces frequently. Traditional foundations remain stable across humidity gradients due to the fixed pigment system. Temperature stability. Skin-responsive tints maintain consistent coverage in cold environments, though pigment activation slows slightly. Traditional foundations can stiffen in cold temperatures, making application difficult and increasing the likelihood of cracking on dry skin zones. UV stability is where both categories struggle. Iron oxides, the primary colorants in both formulations, oxidize under sustained UV exposure, causing color shift toward orange or gray tones. Neither category includes sufficient built-in UV protection. You need a separate SPF 30 to 50 underneath, regardless of which base product you choose. The myth that foundation contains SPF is chemically irrelevant unless it's specifically formulated as a sunscreen with FDA-regulated active percentages.
Oil control throughout the day. Traditional matte foundations with silica microspheres at 8 to 12% actively absorb sebum, maintaining a relatively oil-free appearance for 6 to 8 hours. Skin-responsive tints lack this absorption mechanism. They mix with sebum rather than controlling it. If you produce significant midday oil, you'll need blotting papers with tints versus potentially longer wear with matte foundations. The oxidation timeline tells the story. Check the link below to see the current price for budget-friendly and prestige options. Budget formulations show visible color shift after 5 to 6 hours, while prestige formulations extend that to 7 to 8 hours through antioxidant stabilizers, typically vitamin E at 0.5% to 1% concentration. You're paying for an extra hour or two of color fidelity, quantifiable value, but you decide if it's worth the premium. So, who should choose skin-responsive tints? You're the ideal candidate if you have oily or combination skin prone to foundation breakdown, compromised barrier function requiring minimal occlusion, or mild to moderate hyperpigmentation within 2 to 3 shades of your base tone. The lower comedogenic load reduces acne risk, and the pH compatibility preserves barrier integrity during prolonged wear. Skin-responsive tints excel for minimal coverage aesthetics, the your skin but better look that's dominated beauty trends through 2026. If you prefer dewy, luminous finishes and can tolerate 4 to 6 hour wear time before reapplication, the formulation advantages outweigh coverage limitations. Budget considerations. The $10 to $20 tier delivers 80 to 90% of the performance found in the $40 to $70 prestige tier. Splurge only if you want added anti-inflammatory compounds or extended oxidative stability. The core pH reactive iron oxide technology is effectively commoditized. Anyone layering active treatment products underneath, particularly bioregenerative actives like growth factors or peptides, benefits from the reduced occlusive barrier, which preserves ingredient penetration efficiency. Who should choose traditional foundation? You need traditional foundation if you require full coverage for significant hyperpigmentation, scarring, or vascular conditions. The 15 to 20% titanium dioxide concentration and higher pigment density remain unmatched for mechanical opacity. This isn't negotiable if you're covering melasma, port wine stains, or severe post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. Traditional foundations dominate for long wear requirements, 8 to 12-hour days without access to touch-ups. The stabilized pigment systems and silica-based oil control extend wear time substantially beyond adaptive tint technology. If you work in hot kitchens, healthcare settings with temperature variation, or other environments where reapplication is impractical, the durability advantage justifies the higher barrier disruption. Dry skin types often tolerate traditional foundations better, particularly cream or hydrating formulas with glycerin and ceramides at 2 to 5% concentration. The thicker texture and emollient content prevent the dehydrated appearance that can occur when lightweight tints evaporate too quickly on moisture-depleted skin. Photography and video work demand traditional foundations. The silica microspheres scatter light more effectively, reducing pore appearance and texture in high-definition imaging. Skin-responsive tints lack sufficient optical diffusion for professional imaging standards. Let me answer some frequently asked questions. Can you layer skin-responsive tint over traditional foundation for extra coverage? Yes, you can layer skin-responsive tint over traditional foundation, but the pH reactive pigments won't activate as effectively over the silicone barrier created by foundation, resulting in minimal additional coverage and potential pilling where the two formulation types interact at different viscosities.
You're better off using a full coverage foundation alone or building tint coverage through multiple thin layers on bare skin instead of mixing technologies. Do skin-responsive tints work differently on dry skin versus oily skin? Skin-responsive tints activate more slowly on dry skin due to lower surface moisture affecting pH equilibration, while oily skin's higher sebum production and slightly elevated pH, often 5.5 to 6.5 versus dry skin's 4.5 to 5.5, accelerates pigment release, creating faster and sometimes uneven color development in oil-prone zones like the T-zone. This is why many users with combination skin report better results applying tint to dry areas first and treating oily zones last. How long does it take for skin-responsive tint pigments to fully activate? Skin-responsive tint pigments typically reach full color development within 30 to 90 seconds of application, as the encapsulated iron oxides react to your skin's surface pH, though final color stabilization can take 3 to 5 minutes as the formula sets and any excess water or volatile solvents evaporate. Applying over damp skin from toner or serum can extend activation time by 1 to 2 minutes due to diluted pH interaction at the skin surface. Bottom line, the skin-responsive tint versus foundation decision hinges on coverage needs versus barrier health priorities. If you're working with relatively even skin tone and prioritize long-term barrier integrity, skin-responsive tints deliver superior pH compatibility and reduced comedogenic load at comparable or lower price points than traditional foundations. The budget tier, around $10 to $20, performs within 10 to 15% of prestige options for core functionality.
Traditional foundations remain essential for full coverage requirements and extended wear times. The 15 to 20% titanium dioxide concentration and stabilized pigment systems simply can't be replicated with adaptive technology. Pay attention to price per ounce metrics and comedogenic ratings rather than brand prestige. Formulation quality has democratized significantly across price tiers. For most users managing minor texture and tone variation, the reduced occlusive load and barrier-compatible pH of skin-responsive tints justify switching from traditional foundation, accepting the trade-off of 4 to 6 hour wear time and moderate coverage density. Your skin's barrier function will respond measurably within 2 to 3 weeks of reducing daily silicone exposure. That wraps up today's episode of Luxury Beauty on a Budget podcast. Thanks for listening. I hope this gives you a clearer sense of which formulation actually fits your skin and your routine. New episodes come out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so there's always something new to dig into. If you found this helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star rating and write a quick review. It sounds small, but it genuinely makes a difference in helping other people discover the show when they're searching for honest, science-based beauty information. And make sure you're subscribed or following the show so you get notified the second a new episode drops. Talk soon!